This happened about 10 years ago when I lived in Boston with my husband. I had totally forgotten all about it, but something I read today reminded me of it. We lived in this crappy old building in Jamaica Plains. It was our first place out of college, and it was cheap, and that was all that mattered at the time. The building was one in a row of other apartment buildings that had separate entrances but shared a common roof and basement, so you could enter one building, walk down to the basement, and access the basements of other buildings. Yeah, not very safe, right? The shared laundry room for the 3 to 4 buildings were in the basement, and I hated being down there. It was cold and always had that eerie fluorescent lighting with 1 or 2 lights flickering that just made you depressed. Most of the other residents were college students and were at class during the day. I worked nights back then, so I used some of the daytime hours to do laundry since the laundry room was pretty empty at that time. Luckily, on this day, my husband was off from work too, so we were just hanging out, taking breaks from watching Netflix and cooking to go down there and load up the machines. When we went down there to get our last load from the dryer, it still had a few minutes left, so we decided to wait for it. While we were talking, this man speed walked into the laundry room. I was sitting on top of one of the broken machines, and there were a list of don'ts on the wall that said not to do that. So at first I thought he was coming to give me a hard time about it. But then I noticed that he was really disheveled looking. His clothes were dirty, he hadn't brushed his hair or shaven for a very long time, and he looked like he was definitely on something. He came up to me and held out a large piece of colored craft paper and said, "You need to have this." I took it and looked down at it. It looked like something that kids would make at Sunday school, or maybe something that would be posted up on a board at church and listed the 10 Commandments. Well, maybe 6 or 7 of them because it had been ripped. His eyes looked totally crazed. Massive pupils, and they were bloodshot. And he was looking at my body in a creepy way. He was either on a shit ton of something, or was having a mental health episode. Possibly both. He seemed like he was waiting for me to say something back, and got a little bit impatient about it, but I didn't exactly know what to say. My mind was just stuck on reboot. I was trying to think of rational reasons why he would be trying to give a piece of craft paper to a stranger with commandments on it, but there probably wasn't any. My husband finally broke the silence and said, "Hey man, thanks. Thanks a lot. This is great." The guy seemed satisfied with that, mumbled something and went off. Walked out of the laundry room and back into the connecting hallway. Once he was gone, we got our laundry, went upstairs and called the landlord. She called the cops, but once they got there, they couldn't find him. I highly doubt they searched all the floors of all the buildings, but he could have left. I don't know if he would have hurt me if I was alone, but I definitely wouldn't have diffused or handled the situation as easily. Needless to say, I never went down there alone again. This happened about 4 years ago when my girlfriend and I were 21 years old. We were out on a drive up Highway 1 by Davenport, California. We had spent the day at the beach. It had started to get late, so we decided to take a few back roads to get home. Some of the highways were up on cliffs high above the ocean. There were a lot of turnouts along the highway that people would park in to watch the sunset. I drove by a really sweet turnout that almost always had a car in it, but this time didn't. I did a U-turn and backed into the spot. The spot was small, a huge dirt mound on one side with a steep cliff face on the other. The gap in between the two sides was maybe 16 feet. The mound was on the passenger side. We sat there in the back of my Jeep facing out over the ocean watching the sky turn red. It was really nice. After about 25 minutes, my girlfriend hopped out to get a water bottle from the trunk. As soon as she sat back down, a black BMW SUV pulled up. Like I said before, there was only room for one car in the spot unless you parked directly in front of another car, which is exactly what this guy did. My girlfriend said, "What the hell?" To which I replied, "Right? What a rude ass." She then said, "No, I saw that guy drive past when I was getting the water, and he looked at me. It's weird that he turned around and parked there." That was strange and annoying, but it was such a nice evening, we brushed it off and said to each other that the guy would probably leave in a few minutes anyways. After maybe 10 minutes, the guy gets out of his car. He was a tall, yuppie-looking guy in his 40s or 50s with a dress shirt on. He looked around slowly and walked to the passenger side of the car. He gave a small wave and said hi. We said hi back. There was a long pause before he looked over our car and remarked, "That's a long ways down, isn't it?" He looked back over at us with a creepy half-smile. He then asked, "Do you guys have any cigarettes? Maybe something healthy like American Spirits?" Coincidentally, I had a pack of American Spirits on my dashboard, which he'd most definitely seen when he was walking past the car to look at the cliff top. I gave him one. He responded with, "Ah, yes, thank you." He went back over to his car and started rummaging around in the back. My girlfriend and I turned toward each other as I went. "Isn't this weird?" "And what was with the cliff comment?" she asked. The guy came back over a few minutes later with a fold-out chair and a small duffel bag. He sat down on the chair about 3 feet away from our car. He randomly started asking us questions like, "Are you guys homeless? And are you two from around here?" I tried to play off my unease with a short laugh before responding that yeah, we were about 30 minutes away, not too far. The sun was starting to set and the sky was getting darker. Mr. American Spirit Guy reached into the duffel bag to pull out a large bottle of vodka. "Want some?" he asked, to which we declined. "Suit yourself," he said. We sat there in silence for a few more minutes. The air was growing thick with tension. Out of nowhere, he asked us, "Does anybody know you're here?" My girlfriend and I exchanged looks. At this point, I was getting quite annoyed with him ruining our evening with his creepy questions and behavior. We decided it was time to leave, so I motioned for him to move so we could get out. "How are you going to get out with me blocking you like this?" he asked. Something about his voice made the hairs on the back of my neck stand on end. "I think I might be able to make it by," I said. No chance he didn't hear my nerves edging their way into my voice. I turned on the ignition, heart racing as my girlfriend tapped me on the arm. The man had gotten up and was starting to rummage through the duffel bag again. At that point, I threw the Jeep into drive and with adrenaline rushing through my body, stepped on the gas and started to drive away. I drove up a piece of the cliff, my Jeep almost on 2 wheels as I edged past his car. I quickly looked into my rearview mirror and saw him start to move with purpose. I looked at my girlfriend and saw the same terror on her face that I felt coursing through my veins. I looked back at the man as we pressed on, seeing him in the dusky landscape with a blank look on his face, something long in his hand down by his right side. I never knew what it was. He just stood there for a moment before going back towards the duffel bag. I had put the Jeep into 2-wheel drive on the side of the road real quick before heading back down the hill. We saw the man get back into his car and pull away in the opposite direction. We never saw him again, and we never parked along Highway 1 near nighttime again. I'm starting to realize I've unfortunately been a magnet for this stuff my entire life. So this happened a few years ago, and my brain is still fuzzy because honestly, I've kind of blocked this out from my memory. My older sister, who was 23 at the time, and myself, 20, went to Washington, D.C. one year, and I was super excited because I'd never been before. We started the trip with a private tour of the Capitol building, where one of her friends worked at the time. I was honestly super stoked, even though I had already become disenchanted with politics at that age. It was still really cool to be in the building and learn about the history of our country. After that, we went to the Smithsonian and just genuinely had a lot of fun educating each other in the different subjects we were always into. I was always into math and science. She was into English and history. At the end of one of the days, we were headed to the metro station to get a train back to our hotel. Now, I'd been on train platforms like this before, having visited my uncle in New York City a couple of times, and since then being stationed in Chicago with their metro system, so I had a pretty good understanding of how trains and stops worked. My sister said she needed to go to the bathroom and to wait for her before I got on the train. I told her okay before making my way to the kiosk to reload my card. While I was at the kiosk, I got this feeling that someone was looking at me. That overwhelming feeling of being watched, and it was uncomfortable. I turned my head a little, and there, standing in the corner, was what I could only assume to be a homeless man based off of his appearance, staring right at me with huge eyes. At first I thought nothing of it, as we had people like that back home in Florida, and went back to what I was doing. I pulled out my phone and started playing a game or something while I waited. Before long, my sister came back and we got on our train. We talked for a bit about what time we were getting up the next morning to catch our flight back, since it was later in the day, around noon. When she started to open her mouth, I froze. Standing in the back of the train car, staring at both of us, was the same man I'd seen earlier. I'll never forget his outfit. A dirty gray hoodie, matted brown hair, a face that looked like he'd suffered from heavy substance abuse, dingy skin, ragged blue jeans, and shoes with holes in them. I leaned in towards my sister, not breaking eye contact, and said, "That guy was staring at me earlier, and now he's still watching us on the train." She looked at him and whispered, "If he gets off when we do, we'll make a dead sprint to the hotel." Honestly, I don't know why we didn't call the police, but knowing where our hotel was, on the other end of town, where things started getting sketchy, I don't think it would have made much difference in terms of response time. The train stopped at our station, and we got off. I didn't see the man follow us, so I thought we were okay. It was still about a 5-block walk back to the hotel, and in a really sketchy part of town. It's not that we were cheapskates, it's just all we could afford in all honesty. As we walked, we continued our previous conversation, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. I turned around and saw the man, hidden behind a brick wall, peeking out like Kilroy. I froze. My sister turned around and saw him too. When he realized he'd been busted, he stood straight up and gave a big, cracked grin and just kept staring. I wanted to challenge him, being 6'3", 215 pounds at the time, and yell out, "What the fuck do you want?" But I remembered my previous encounter with someone following me and just froze, barely squeaking out, "Fuck." It was about this time the man started walking towards us. I wasn't frozen anymore. We both started a dead sprint toward the hotel. As terrifying as the situation was already, what happened next still makes every hair on my body stand straight up. The man screamed absolute nonsense loudly before letting out a Joker-esque cackle, chasing after us. I was lagging behind my sister a little so she could get to safety before me. She was smaller than me, and I knew if I needed to, I could try to fight this guy. I grabbed my wallet from my pocket and pulled out the room key, since it was one of those hotels where you needed to have a key to access the building. Once we were inside, I realized just how far away the guy was from me. I had played football in high school and I was still pretty fast, and I had to have had about 10 or 15 yards between us, even if I was running slow. We didn't say anything, we just went upstairs to our room and made sure it was locked in every way possible. We left super early and took an Uber to the airport. I don't know what it is with people chasing after me, and I still don't know what that dude wanted. I never want to find out.